The rain fell in silver sheets across the marble steps of the Aldrini estate, and Rosalind Vance stood in the shadow of the great iron gates with her arms wrapped around her ribs, praying that the man behind those doors would not look at her too closely. Because if he looked, he would know, and if he knew, someone was going to die tonight. She had rehearsed her breathing in the taxi. Shallow. Even. Not too shallow, because that would look wrong. Not too deep, because the pain would break her open like a cracked porcelain cup. 3 cracked ribs, the emergency room doctor had whispered, and possibly a 4th. She had left before they could file the report. She had left because she knew what would happen if a report existed. She knew what would happen if Dante Aldrini ever saw her name written on a hospital chart next to the word assault. So she had buttoned her long coat over the bruises, tucked her hair behind her ears, and come to work as if this were any other Tuesday evening. As if she were still simply the estate's head florist. The soft-spoken woman with the wide hips and the gentle hands who arranged white lilies for a man who never smiled. The doors opened before she touched them. They always did. Marco, the head of household security, gave her a small nod, his eyes lingering half a second longer than usual on her face. She smiled at him. The small automatic smile she had perfected over 29 years of being overlooked, and stepped inside. The foyer smelled of cedar and old money. Somewhere upstairs a piano played something slow and mournful. She knew the piano. She knew that Dante Aldrini himself sometimes played it late at night when he thought no one was awake, though she had never told him she had heard. She only knew because she had once stayed late arranging peonies for a Sunday brunch, and the music had drifted down through the stairwell like a secret. Rosalind moved carefully toward the East Conservatory, where her workroom waited. Every step was a negotiation with her ribs. Every breath was a small betrayal of the pain she was hiding. But she made it. She always made it. She had been working in the Aldrini household for 2 years. 2 years of arranging flowers for a man she had barely seen more than a dozen times. 2 years of quiet paychecks that were, she had eventually noticed, 3 times what any other florist in the city earned. She had once tried to correct what she thought was an accounting error, and Marco had told her, with a face carved from stone, that the amount was correct, and that she should not raise the matter again. She had not raised it again. In the workroom, she set down her satchel and stared at the fresh delivery of white orchids waiting on the long steel table. She lifted her hand toward them and had to pause, breath catching in her throat, as a wave of hot sharp pain rolled through her side. "Do not cry," she told herself. "Do not cry here." Because Dante Aldrini did not tolerate his people being in pain. He did not tolerate his people being wronged. And Rosalind, though she had never permitted herself to say it aloud, understood in the deepest part of herself that she had somehow become one of his people, the moment she had walked through those gates. She began her work slowly. Meticulously. She kept her coat on, hiding the way she held her side. 2 floors above, in a study lined with dark walnut shelves and the low glow of a single green lamp, Dante Aldrini set down his fountain pen and lifted his head. He did not know why. Something in the air had shifted, something small, something almost imperceptible. Yet he had learned long ago to trust these small shifts, because they were often the difference between his empire's survival and its ruin. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with black hair cut short and eyes the color of winter iron. He wore a charcoal suit even in his own home, because he did not believe in casual clothing, and he did not believe in casual moments. He was 36 years old, and he had been the head of the Aldrini family for 11 of those years. He had built the empire his grandfather had left him into something that stretched across 3 continents, and he had done it without ever once raising his voice. He stood, he crossed to the window. Quote, "Sass." He looked down at the courtyard where the rain continued to fall. Alessio, his consigliere and oldest friend, glanced up from the leather chair by the fire. "Something wrong." "She's here," Dante said quietly. Alessio did not need to ask who she was. Alessio had known for the better part of 2 years, though he had waited patiently for his boss to admit it. He was still waiting. "She's usually here on Tuesdays." "Something is different." "Different how?" Dante did not answer. He was already moving toward the door. Downstairs, Rosalind had managed to arrange half the orchids in the tall crystal vase. When she heard footsteps on the marble corridor outside, she recognized them immediately. Every woman in the household recognized those footsteps. Slow, measured, certain, like a man who had never in his life needed to hurry. She straightened. She smoothed her coat. She tried to school her face into something that did not look like a woman who was breaking apart from the inside. The door opened. Dante Aldrini filled the frame the way a shadow fills a room, and she felt his gaze land on her before she had time to look up. His eyes moved over her once, slowly in the way that always made her feel as if he were counting things she did not know she carried. "Miss Vance," he said, "Mr. Aldrini." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Said." He did not move from the doorway. His gaze stayed on her, and she felt with a slow-blooming certainty that he was looking at the way she held her arms slightly against her side. She turned quickly back to the orchids and tried to lift one out of the bucket. It was a small orchid. It should have been easy. Pain lanced through her ribs like a wire pulled tight. Her breath hitched. The orchid slipped from her fingers and fell to the steel table with a soft, terrible sound. Silence. For 3 full seconds, the room did not move. Rosalind stared at the fallen flower, and Dante Aldrini stared at Rosalind, and somewhere behind him, Alessio had appeared in the corridor and gone, very, very still. "Miss Vance," Dante said. His voice had not changed. It was the same low, even voice it had always been. And yet— "I'm sorry," Rosalind whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean this up. Come here." She looked up. He was not looking at her anymore. He was looking at some point just past her shoulder, and his jaw had set in a way she had never seen before. He extended his hand palm up, and waited. She did not know why she obeyed. She only knew that in 2 years she had never disobeyed him. And she was not going to start now. She stepped forward. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with terrifying gentleness. "Open your coat," he said. "Mr. Aldrini." "Rosalind." It was the first time he had ever used her first name. The sound of it in his low voice made something in her chest crack that had nothing to do with her ribs. "Open your coat, please." Her hands were shaking. She fumbled with the buttons. She undid them one by one, and when the coat fell open, she did not have to say a word. Beneath the soft cream blouse, the bruises had already begun to bloom in a violent purple across her side, reaching up along her ribs like the shadow of a hand, a boot print actually. She had not looked at it in the mirror. She had not wanted to. Dante Aldrini did not speak for a long moment. His face did not change. But the air in the room changed, and Rosalind felt the temperature of the world drop by 10 degrees. Behind him, Alessio stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him without being asked. He looked at the bruise. He looked at his boss. He said, very softly, "Boss." Dante did not answer. He was still holding Rosalind's hand. "Oh," he said finally. "It doesn't matter." Rosalind, his eyes finally lifted to hers, and what she saw in them made her forget, for a moment, how to breathe. It was not anger. Anger would have been simpler. What she saw was something colder and older and infinitely more patient, like a glacier that had been moving toward the sea for 1,000 years, and had, at long last, arrived. "Who did this to you?" She swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "My landlord's son, Victor Kell." "I?" "He wanted the apartment. He wanted me out. I told him I had a lease. I told him I would pay, and he came back tonight with 2 of his friends, and they—" She stopped. She could not say the rest. Dante turned his head just slightly toward Alessio. He looked at her, just once. His gaze traveled over the bruise, over the way she was holding herself, over the pale exhaustion on her face. And then his eyes came back to her own, and he said, in a voice as calm as still water, "He's finished." That was all. He did not raise his voice. He did not swear. He did not make a phone call. He simply released her hand with the same terrible gentleness with which he had taken it, and he turned to Alessio, and he said, "Get Dr. Vittori. I want him in the East Suite in 15 minutes, full imaging. Ribs, spleen, kidneys. And I want the Kell file on my desk before I finish speaking to her." "Yes, boss." And Alessio, "Yes, black protocol, quiet version. I want no ambulances, no headlines, no witnesses. I want Victor Kell in a room by midnight, and I want his father, and I want the 2 friends, and I want whatever else has been touching this woman's life without my knowledge." Alessio bowed his head. "Understood." Maul. He was gone before Rosalind could speak. She stood in the middle of her workroom, still holding the edge of her coat, and stared at the impossibly calm man who had just, apparently, mobilized an army on her behalf. "Mr. Aldrini," she whispered, I don't understand." He turned back to her, and for the first time in 2 years, she watched something in his face soften. "I know," he said. "You will. But not tonight. Tonight you are going to let a doctor look at you, and you are going to eat something warm. And you are going to sleep in a bed in this house where nothing can reach you. And tomorrow, when you are stronger, we will speak, and— Why? Is that acceptable?" She nodded, because she could not do anything else. He extended his arm to her. She took it, because she could not walk on her own, and she was tired, so terribly tired of pretending. He led her out of the workroom. He led her up the wide marble staircase. He led her past a piano she had never officially heard him play, past oil paintings of grim-eyed ancestors, into a suite of rooms she had never entered, where a fire was already lit, and a bed was already turned down as if someone had been expecting her. Dr. Vittori arrived within 12 minutes. He was a small, silver-haired man with the manner of a favorite uncle and the credentials of a surgeon who had once operated on heads of state. He touched her with unbelievable delicacy. He photographed her bruise for a file that would not exist in any hospital. He confirmed 3 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in a 4th. He gave her something for the pain that made the room grow soft at the edges. Through all of it, Dante Aldrini stood in the doorway, with his hands in his pockets, and his eyes fixed on some distant point in the corridor, and he did not once look away. She fell asleep before she could thank him. Downstairs, in a room that did not appear on any of the estate's blueprints, Alessio spread a series of photographs on a long steel table. Dante Aldrini stood over them, his jacket removed at last, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked at each photograph in turn. Victor Kell, 26 years old. Father owned a modest chain of rental properties. 2 prior assault charges, both quietly dismissed. A pattern of harassing female tenants until they left, so that the units could be flipped to higher-paying clients. His father knew, Alessio said quietly. The father authorized it. There are emails. Show me. Alessio slid a tablet across the table. Dante read. His face did not change. When he was finished, he set the tablet down with the same care, he might have used with a piece of fine china. The properties, he said, 12 buildings, 360 units, financed through a small regional bank. By the bank. Alessio blinked. Tonight? Tonight? That will require. I do not care what it will require. I want that bank in Aldrini hands before sunrise. I want every loan on every Kell property called in by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want their construction contracts terminated. I want their insurance policies reviewed. I want their tax returns audited. I want their staff offered employment elsewhere at double their current salaries. Alessio wrote quickly. And Victor? Dante was silent for a long moment. He walked to the window. He looked out at the rain. Alive, he said finally. But by the time we are finished with him, he will wish he were not. He will never own property again. He will never rent property again. He will never touch another woman in this city, or in this country, or on this continent. He will spend the rest of his life understanding, in perfect detail, what he did tonight. And his two friends? The same, Alessio nodded. He gathered the photographs. He paused at the door. Boss, yes? She is going to ask you eventually why you did this. Dante did not turn from the window. I know. What are you going to tell her? There was a long silence. The rain fell harder against the glass. The truth, Dante said. I will tell her the truth. Alessio smiled a small, tired, patient smile, and closed the door behind him. Rosalind woke before dawn. For a moment she did not know where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft, the sheets too fine, the light coming in through the tall windows the wrong color. Then she moved, and pain reminded her of everything. She sat up slowly. Someone had left a robe folded on the chair beside the bed, and a tray of breakfast on a small table by the fire. Tea, still warm. Fresh bread, a small dish of honey, a bowl of berries, and a folded note on cream paper written in a hand she recognized because she had seen it. Once, on a signed check she had almost refused. Take what time you need. When you are ready, ring the small bell on the mantel. Someone will come. There was no signature. There did not need to be. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, and she stared at that note for a long, long time. Then she began, very slowly, to cry. Not because she was afraid. Not because she was in pain. She was crying because for the first time in a very long time, she had woken up in a place where someone had left her honey and warm tea, and permission to rest. She had spent her whole life being the woman other people forgot. Her mother had died when she was 14. Her father had remarried a woman who barely looked at her, and had two thinner daughters, who took up all the light in every room. She had put herself through school working in flower shops, because flowers did not judge her for her wide hips or her soft arms or her round face. She had learned to be quiet and useful and easy to overlook. She had not known, until this moment, that she had been waiting all her life for someone to notice her without making her small. She wiped her eyes. She drank the tea. She rang the bell. A young woman in a soft gray uniform appeared within 30 seconds, smiling gently, and asked her whether she would like a bath drawn, and whether she preferred her clothes brought up from the workroom or something fresh from the guest wardrobe, which had apparently been stocked in her exact size overnight. Rosalind stared at her. In my size? Yes, Miss Vance. Mr. Aldrini was very specific. She went very still. Something began to prickle at the back of her mind. Something that had been prickling there for 2 years if she were honest with herself. The paychecks that were too large. The flowers he always ordered but never seemed to give to anyone. The way she had once mentioned in passing that she liked lavender tea. and had found a fresh tin of it in the workroom the following Tuesday. The way Marco always seemed to know when her shift was ending, and always seemed to have a car ready to take her home. Even when she had insisted, again and again, that the bus was fine. The bus that had, come to think of it, been oddly empty. For the past year, as if someone had been paying to keep the seats around her clear. Oh, Rosalind thought, with the slow dawning of a woman who has finally begun to see the shape of something enormous standing behind her. Oh no, oh yes. Oh dear God. She bathed. She dressed in clothes that fit her better than anything she owned. She descended the stairs slowly, one hand pressed lightly against her ribs, and she found Dante Aldrini waiting for her in the small library off the entry hall. He rose when she entered. He always rose when a woman entered a room, she remembered now. She had watched him do it 100 times without noticing. "Miss Vance," he said. "Rosalind," she said quietly. "You called me Rosalind last night. I would prefer that you continue." Something moved in his eyes. He inclined his head. "Rosalind, may I sit, please?" She sat carefully in a green velvet chair by the fire. He sat across from her. Between them a small silver tray held coffee. She was too nervous to drink. "I need to ask you some questions," she said. "I expected that. You bought this bank last night." He did not blink. "I did." "You bought a bank last night because of me." "I bought a bank last night because a man authorized violence against you." The bank was the instrument that made his violence possible. She was silent for a long time. She looked into the fire. "2 years ago," she said, "when you hired me, I applied to arrange flowers for a wedding, not to work here. I did not know this house existed. Someone from the wedding planner's office called me and said the Aldrini estate needed a permanent florist, and that they had recommended me. And when I came here for the interview, there was no interview. Marco simply handed me a contract." "Yes, you arranged that." "Yes. The paychecks are too large. They match the value of your work. They match the value of my work in your eyes. Not the market. Rosalind." His voice was very quiet. "The market has been wrong about many things, including you." She had to look away from him for a moment. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest. "The lavender tea," she said. "I asked." "The bus," he did not answer. Which was itself an answer. "The dinner date," she said slowly. 6 months ago, I had one date. One. He canceled 2 hours before. He said the restaurant had suddenly closed for renovations. On the day of my date. "Yes. You bought the restaurant." There was a long pause. "It was an efficient acquisition," Dante Aldrini said. She stared at him. He looked back at her with the perfect stillness of a man who had never in his life apologized for a decision, and did not intend to start now. "Why?" she whispered. He set down his coffee cup. He leaned forward, his forearms on his knees. And for the first time since she had met him, he seemed to be searching for words that were larger than he had a supply of. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you were in the flower market on Warren Street. You were arranging peonies for an old woman who could not afford them. You gave her the entire bouquet for the price of 3 stems. You told her they were on sale. They were not on sale. You paid the difference out of your own pocket, and you did not know that anyone was watching." Rosalind's hands began to tremble. "I was watching," he said. "I did not know your name. I did not know anything about you except that in a city full of people who take, you had chosen to give, and that no one in your life seemed to be noticing that you were doing it. I had lived my entire life among people who calculate every kindness. And I saw you, and I understood for the first time in a very long time that there were still human beings in this world who were made of something better than that. So you, she managed, bought me a job. I made sure you did not have to worry about money. I made sure the people around you could not hurt you. I made sure that if anyone tried, I would know. And that when I knew, I could act. You could have simply spoken to me. I could have. Why didn't you? He was silent. Rosalind, he said finally. Do you know what I am? Yes. She swallowed. I think I have always known. Then you understand why I did not simply speak to you. A woman who has known nothing but gentleness her whole life should not be pulled into a man's world without her consent. I did not want your love, if it came from fear, or from gratitude, or from obligation. I wanted, he stopped, he looked into the fire. I wanted you to have a life, a safe life, a life where you were paid what you were worth, and treated the way you deserved. And if, at some point, you happened to look up and see me standing there, He did not finish. He did not need to. Rosalind sat very still in the green velvet chair. Her ribs ached. Her heart ached more. Mr. Aldrini, she said quietly. Dante. Dante. The name felt strange in her mouth. Strange and enormous and right. I need some time. Take all of it. I mean, she said, I need to think. I need to. I need to understand what has been done to me, and what has been done for me. And I need to understand whether they are the same thing or two different things. And I do not know if I can do that under this roof. He nodded slowly. You may go home whenever you wish. Your apartment is being repaired. Marco will take you anywhere you would like to go. My apartment? The damage from last night. It is being repaired. It will be ready by tomorrow. In the meantime, if you would prefer a hotel, I will arrange one. Or, if you would prefer a friend's home, Marco will drive you. Whatever you choose. Dante! Her voice was very small. You cannot keep doing this. I know. I need you to stop. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I will try. Try harder than that. The very smallest ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. He inclined his head. Yes, I will try harder than that. She rose. He rose with her. She walked to the door, and then she paused, and she turned back to him. The man who did this, she said. Victor, yes, I do not want him hurt. Dante Aldrini's expression did not change. But something in his eyes went very still. Rosalind, I mean it. I don't want him dead. I don't want him in a hospital. I don't want him. She struggled for the words. I don't want to become the reason someone else's body has bruises on it. Not even his. That's not who I am, and it's not who I want to love. She had not meant to say that last word. It slipped out of her before she could catch it. Her face flushed hot. Dante Aldrini stood in the middle of that library, and he looked at her as if she had just handed him something he had been afraid, for a very long time, that he would never be permitted to hold. He will not be hurt, he said quietly. He will simply lose everything he used to hurt you. He will lose the buildings. He will lose the money. He will lose the reputation. He will lose the ability to ever do this to another woman. But his body will remain intact, because you asked. Thank you, she whispered. Rosalind. Yes, you said something just now. About who you want to love. She could not look at him. She looked at the fire instead. I know. I will not hold you to it. You are frightened, and you are hurt. And you have just learned things about your own life that no one should have to learn in a single morning. But I will remember it. For whenever you are ready. She nodded. Just once. Then she left. Marco drove her to her best friend, Priya's apartment on the other side of the city. Priya took one look at her face. pulled her inside, and did not ask a single question for the first 2 hours. She simply made soup and put on soft music and let Rosalind cry. When Rosalind finally told her everything, Priya sat back on the couch and stared at the ceiling. "So let me get this straight," she said. "The most terrifying man in the country has been quietly running your life like a benevolent shadow government for 2 years. Yes, he bought a restaurant to ruin your date. Yes, he bought a bank last night. Yes, because someone hurt you. Yes." Priya turned her head. "Rosalind." "Yes. I know I'm supposed to say this is horrifying and controlling and unhealthy, and part of it is, and I'll get to that in a minute, but sweetheart, that man is in love with you. I know. Are you in love with him?" Rosalind was quiet for a very long time. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I have been for a very long time. I just did not know I was allowed to be." Priya reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then here's what you are going to do," she said. "You are going to heal. You are going to think. And when you are ready, you are going to go back, and you are going to tell that man exactly what your terms are. Because a man like that does not need a woman who says yes to everything. A man like that needs a woman who will look him in the eye and tell him the truth. And you, my darling, are the only woman I have ever met who can do that without flinching." Rosalind laughed. It hurt her ribs. She laughed anyway. 2 weeks passed. Her ribs healed. She returned to work. She and Dante spoke every day now, small, careful conversations that grew a little longer each time. He asked her opinion on things. He listened to her answers. He did not buy her anything. He did not remove anything from her path. When she mentioned, once, that she was thinking of taking a pottery class, she did not arrive at the studio to find that he had bought the studio. She arrived at the studio to find a normal studio, with normal students, and a small potted violet on her assigned wheel, with a card that said only, "I hope you enjoy it." He had signed it with a single letter. D. She kept the card. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week, everything went wrong. She was closing the workroom for the day when 3 men in dark suits stepped through the conservatory door. They were not Aldrini men. She knew every Aldrini man on the estate, by name. These men were strangers, and their faces were wrong, and one of them was already reaching into his jacket. She did the only thing she could think to do. She ran. She made it to the corridor. She made it to the marble stairs. She made it 3 steps up before a hand closed around her ankle and pulled her down, and her already tender rib struck the edge of the step, and pain exploded through her whole body so completely that she could not scream. The last thing she saw before the cloth pressed over her face was Marco rounding the far corner of the corridor, his hand going to his weapon, his mouth already opening to shout. Then, darkness. She woke in a moving vehicle. Her hands were bound, her mouth was taped. She could not see. Something soft was pressed against her face, and she realized, distantly, that they had put a hood over her head. A voice was speaking somewhere above her. Want him to come himself. That is the entire point. Tell him she is alive. Tell him she will stay alive only as long as he does exactly what he is told. Tell him where to come. Tell him to come alone. Another voice. He'll never come alone, the first voice laughed. It was a cold, thin laugh, and Rosalind did not recognize it. But she understood from the sound of it that whoever was speaking had been planning this for a very long time. "Oh, he will," the voice said. "For her he will. That is what makes her useful." She closed her eyes inside the hood. She thought of Dante. And she thought of his still face and his quiet voice, the way he had said, "I will try harder than that." She thought of the pottery studio, and the small violet, and the single letter, D. She thought, do not come alone. She thought it as hard as she could, as if she could push the thought across the city and into his head. Do not come alone. Do not come alone. Do not come alone. At the Aldrini estate, Marco stood in front of his boss's desk with blood on his sleeve from a wound he had not yet had time to bandage, and he said, in a voice that was as steady as he could make it, "They took her, boss. 4 men. Not ours, not any family. I recognized they knew the schedule, they knew the door, they knew the cameras. Someone inside gave them the map. Dante Aldrini did not move. He was sitting behind his desk. His hands were flat on the wood. His eyes were fixed on the small vase of white orchids that Rosalind had arranged that morning. Alessio stood by the window. He was already on his phone. Boss, Marco said quietly. There's a message. They sent a message. Dante lifted his eyes. Read it, Marco read. The message named a place. It named a time. It said he was to come alone. It said if he did not come alone, they would return Rosalind to him in pieces. The silence that followed the reading of that message was the deepest silence Marco had ever heard in his life. Dante Aldrini rose from his chair. Alessio, he said, yes. Black protocol, full version. Alessio's hand tightened on his phone. Full, every asset, every soldier, every favor, every eye in this city, every mouth on our payroll, every ear in every police station and hospital and airport. I want to know who has taken her within the hour. I want to know why within 2. I want her back before sunrise. And when I have her back, I want the person who authorized this alive and in a room, and I want them to understand, before anything else, that they have made a mistake so profound that no one will ever repeat it again. Understood, Marco? Boss, you were injured protecting her. Yes, boss, you will be rewarded. Tonight you will drive. Marco bowed his head. They found her, 4 hours. It turned out that the man who had orchestrated her kidnapping was a rival named Silvio Corvo, an aging figure from an old family who had spent a decade watching the Aldrini Empire eclipse his own, and who had at last decided that if he could not defeat Dante Aldrini directly, he would defeat him by taking the only thing Dante had ever been observed to want. It was an elegant plan. It had one flaw. He had underestimated how quickly a man with unlimited resources could move when the woman he loved was in danger. By the time the sun rose over the city, Silvio Corvo's every business had been financially cut off at the knees. His every lieutenant had been identified and detained, his every safe house had been surrounded, and his most trusted man had been offered, and had accepted, a truly astonishing amount of money in exchange for the address of the warehouse where Rosalind was being held. Dante Aldrini arrived at the warehouse at 4:17 in the morning. He did not arrive alone. He arrived with 60 men, deployed in a silent, coordinated ring around the property, and with 3 helicopters overhead, and with a helicopter surgeon on standby, and with Dr. Vittori waiting in a car with a warm blanket. He walked through the warehouse door first. He walked through it calmly. There were 7 men inside. Within 90 seconds, 6 of them were on the floor, disarmed and restrained, and the 7th, Silvio Corvo himself, was pressed back against a wall with Dante Aldrini's hand around his throat. Where? Dante said quietly. Silvio's eyes flickered to a door at the back of the warehouse. Dante did not release him, he simply turned his head. Alessio was already moving. They found Rosalind in a small back room, tied to a chair, hooded, gagged, and terrified, but alive. Whole. But the hood came off, and the gag came off, and the ropes came off, and Alessio wrapped her immediately in a coat and said, "You are safe. He's here. He's coming. You are safe." She was shaking so hard she could not speak. Then Dante was there. He was on his knees in front of her chair. His hands were cupping her face with the same terrifying gentleness he had used on the night he had first held her hand, and his eyes, his winter iron eyes, were wet. "Rosalind, Dante, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have seen it. I should have—" "Stop." Her voice was hoarse. She placed her hand over his. "Stop. You came for me. That is all I need." He pressed his forehead to hers. He was trembling. She had not known, until that moment, that Dante Aldrini was capable of trembling. "I love you," he whispered. "I have loved you for 2 years. I would have loved you for 20 more from a distance if you had asked me to. But if you will have me, I will love you out loud for the rest of my life." She kissed him. She kissed him in a dirty warehouse at 4:23 in the morning, with tape residue on her mouth, and rope burns on her wrists, and her ribs aching where they had struck the stairs. And it was the finest kiss of her life. Silvio Corvo did not die that night. Rosalind, when she was strong enough to speak, asked that he not be killed. She asked that no one be killed. She was becoming, Alessio observed to Dante, later, with the ghost of a smile, quite good at asking for things. Silvio Corvo lost his empire instead. Every business, every property, every account. His family was disbanded. His men were absorbed into the Aldrini family, or dismissed with generous severance. He himself was permitted to retire to a small house in a small town in the south of the country, under permanent quiet supervision, where he would live out the remainder of his life as a man who had reached for something that did not belong to him and had lost everything he had brought. Victor Kell, in a separate matter, was tried in civil court for the assault. Rosalind pressed the charges. Dante did not interfere with the trial. He simply made sure, in his quiet way, that the prosecutor was excellent and that every witness was brave. Victor Kell went to prison for 3 years, and when he came out, he found that no one in the country would rent to him, employ him, or lend to him. He moved to a distant city and became, by all accounts, a very quiet man. 6 months after the warehouse, on a warm Saturday afternoon, the Rosalind Vance Foundation opened its doors on a wide, green corner of the city. It was a place for women who had been hurt in the way Rosalind had been hurt, and who did not have anywhere to go. It offered legal help. It offered housing. It offered flowers, of course, in every room, arranged by a small staff that Rosalind had trained herself. It was funded, in perpetuity, by an anonymous donor whose name was not on any of the paperwork, but whose signature, if anyone had known to look for it, was in the single letter carved into the cornerstone, D. At the opening ceremony, Rosalind stood in a soft blue dress that fit her wide, warm, curvy body exactly right, and she spoke to a crowd of 200 people about what it had meant to her to be seen, at last, by the world. When she finished speaking, Dante Aldrini walked up onto the small wooden stage. He did not usually appear at public events. The crowd went very quiet. He took her hand. He knelt down on the wooden boards in a charcoal suit that had cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot, and he opened a small velvet box. "Rosalind Vance," he said, in a voice that was quiet but that carried, somehow, to the very back of the crowd. 2 years ago, I watched you give a bouquet of peonies to a woman who could not afford them. I have loved you every day since. I have not always known how to show it. I have not always done it well. But I would like, if you will permit me, to spend the rest of my life learning. Will you marry me?" She was crying, she was laughing, she was nodding. "Yes, you strange, terrifying, ridiculous man. Yes." The crowd, which included a great many people who had spent years being afraid of Dante Aldrini, began to applaud. He rose. He kissed her. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit exactly, because of course it did.
뭐,
Later, much later, when the ceremony had ended, and the guests had gone home and the two of them stood on the small back terrace of the foundation building, looking out at the city as the sun sank low over the buildings, Rosalind leaned her head against his shoulder. Dante, yes? Do you remember, that night, when I opened my coat, and you looked at me, and you said, "He's finished"? I remember, I thought, in that moment, that you were the most terrifying man I had ever met, and now... She smiled into his shoulder. Now, she said, I think you are the only man I have ever met who saw me before. I even saw myself, and I think I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that I saw you back. He turned. He cupped her face. He kissed her forehead. Slowly, the way a man kisses something he has waited a very long time to be permitted to hold. Above them, the sky went gold, and then pink, and then a soft, deep, quiet blue. The rain, when it came again later that night, fell gently on the roof of the foundation building, and on the estate across the city, and on all the small good things that two people had, at last together, begun to build. And somewhere, in a small back room of the foundation, a single white orchid opened its petals in a crystal vase, tended by a woman who had finally learned, after 29 long years, that she had always been worth noticing. She had always been worth loving. She had always, without knowing it, been the unseen gem in a world that had simply been waiting for the right pair of quiet, patient, winter iron eyes to see her at last.